Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to our fourth episode for the government study group we've been doing the last month. So we usually have some people here that join me in the video chat. One of the regulars, Vile, couldn't make it today. I'm trying to telegram everybody else, but if you're out there, please say hello on the chat window. Anita, hello. If I'm gonna invite you in. Um, so yeah, I'm kind of lonely here today. So if anybody else wants to join me, that'd be great. Hey, Jay Buck. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, for whatever reason, if your video is not working or just are more comfortable in the chat, that's fine. So I invited Anita and Jason as well. Okay, hey Jess, how's it going? So I remember you from Codex. Hope everything's going well with that. So we have Jason on audio.
Hey, everybody.
How's it going, Jason?
I'm good. How's everybody?
Good, good. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, Shios. So who else might want to be on? So if anyone has just recently joined us and want to be on the video chat, that'd be great. I think we might have room for one more. We have Jason on audio, and then I think Anita should be coming soon, but hopefully there's no technical issues. Usually Chrome is the best browser to use for Crowdcast. So
yeah, I'm using Chrome and I haven't had any problems with it.
okay, great. And Tanish, I see you kind of hop in. Would you like to be on video or audio? Because it seems like it'd be great to have your input on just the bond system. And I know that we had a conversation, or actually the EOS Alliance had a session, I think it was a couple days ago. And the bond system was kind of a significant part of that discussion. So for some reason, Anita isn't able to. Maybe I should just re-invite you, Anita. Something's wrong. And Tanish, are you there? If you can say something, if you want to be on video or audio, let me know. So I'm going to invite you again. Oh, Anita, would you like to be on the webcam or audio? Audio? Okay. So I think I'll just invite you on the screen and then you can. Okay. So I'm going to invite you again. So Jason, when you get in on audio, what is the prompt that you get?
At the bottom of the screen, there's a little thing that pops up saying something to the effect of check my camera and check my microphone or accept the invitation. And so
Okay.
you click on that and open it up and give it permission to access your microphone and camera, or just choose one or the other.
Okay. So I guess they'll ask you for both video and audio, and I guess you can just do it even if you only have audio. So we'll see. We'll wait for a little bit. Anita's how's it going, Tanish? Yeah, it'd be great to, Tanish has a project called Tungsten while we're waiting, and it's if you could give a link to that, that'd be great. And it's a way to get a bonding system on EOS that can help with enforcement of dispute resolution. So
Yeah, I read about that. I think that's a really smart idea.
Yeah, because when you think about it, like when we're talking about all this, enforcement is difficult, right? I mean, I mean, are we going to start reversing transactions or just, creating this? It could become a mess if we're having to change transactions, right? So it's almost probably the most efficient way to handle it is to have bonds instead, or insurance as well. Those are the two um, ways we can handle that. So
I
thanks for the link,
agree
Tanish.
with that. I think enforcement is really tough, and it just becomes a lot easier. And this applies not just to EOS, but it applies to the space of cryptocurrency in general. That um, we solve our problems ourselves. Sort of self responsibility is the order of the day in crypto. And if people are entering into an agreement where there might be a dispute, if it's foreseeable, sort of voluntary self regulation at the beginning just makes the whole thing a lot smoother.
Yeah, yeah, and hopefully we'll get to a point where we have a reputation, identity, and things like that. Where I mean, that will be worse if you don't comply with these arbitration rulings, and you're almost will be very incentivized to uh, make I guess restitution to whoever kind of you're kind of the losing counterparty to. So let's get started. For some reason, Anita is I'm not sure why it's not working right now. So hopefully it'll be fine. I wish someone would join me on the video. So uh, anybody else, we only have a handful of people here today. So let's just get started.
I would, but my webcam on this laptop actually doesn't work.
Okay, so your webcam doesn't, the video doesn't work. So
Yeah, the webcam itself doesn't work at all. So I would, but I'm kind of hooped.
okay, no, it's fine. I mean, audio is fine. It's just for some reason. Yeah, I sent you an invitation, Anita. I don't know if you've seen the pop-up, but it should be asking you. So, but it's fine. We'll keep trying. I'll invite you again. I'll just remove this and I'll invite you again, Anita. And uh, and if you see something pop up, you feel free to accept that. So let's get started. Jason, you were there last week. I should also ask Anna. She was there last week. So we covered the first 5 articles of version 2 of the Constitution.
Right.
I do recommend people read the preface to the Constitution, and also I'm giving the link down below. And I think we went straight to the articles. It would have been good because I think I missed some things based on what was written in the block 1 article there, or I guess you can call it a blog, but I put the link below, and it gives the kind of the philosophical foundation of why they created version 2 of the Constitution. I'll also, let me share this too. I'm going to make this a public link. But I copied and pasted version 1 and version 2 of the Constitution on a Google Doc. And so let me give that link. I'm going to make it public. And that's all I did. And what I also did was just highlight the articles where there was overlap.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. That article, the block 1. So those are both good links to go after to read. So Bytemaster wrote a Medium blog, and then block 1 created another just blog article that explains the Constitution version 2. So both those links, the one Tanish linked and then the one I did, are both good reads. So And then I'm going to give you a third link here, which is the public Google Doc that has version 1 and version 2.
Nice.
And before I get too far in, I guess, let me see. Just to give you a review, the very first study session was really just a discussion of broad governance topics. We went through, whether governance or DApp layer arbitration or base layer arbitration was, the pros and cons of that. So we started without really going into the articles. The second study session, we went over version 1. We went through, I think, the first 5 articles. And then the last study session, we went over version 2 about the same. We went over about 5 articles. And the version 2 is very short. There's only 9, so we could probably cover the rest today. And the other good thing is that there's a lot of overlap. So if you look at the highlighted, what I highlighted, actually version 2 is actually on the 3rd page of the Google Doc. There's only one person on it. But if you guys go hit the link, there's Constitution version 2 with the highlights of which articles are in both. So I see a couple more people in here, which is good. So if you go to the last page, maybe I should have put Constitution version 2 in the beginning. So let me do that. So just make it easier, because that's what we're talking about. So I'm gonna so at the top of the page, on the first page, sorry if I change this up a little here. So version 2 is also on the Google Doc, and you can see the highlighted is really similar. Articles that are similar to ones in version 1. They're not. Some of the articles are changed significantly. Others are not. Others don't really change much. So anyways, and then right after you see version 1 with the highlights as well. So it'll refer to, the highlighted will refer to a particular article in version 2. So let's get started, I guess. Jason, what do you think? Just get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
So I think we left off at article 5 or so.
Yes.
So let's just dump into 6 then.
All right.
So version 6, maybe if you want to read it, Jason.
Okay, let's see here. Article 6 says, a Ricardian contract is deemed accepted when a transaction based on that contract is incorporated into the blockchain.
Okay, so it seems like a procedural article. And if we also, just as a background, if we look at version 1, article 18, it's titled acceptance. And I think this is what it is, the equivalent in version 1. A contract is deemed accepted when a member signs a transaction which incorporates a TAPOS proof of block whose implied state incorporates an ABI of said contract, and said transaction is incorporated into the blockchain. So I think that's the version 1 article that this one refers to. It simplifies it. It seems. Is that correct, do you think?
I agree with that. I think that version 2 simplifies the same basic thing. I think version 1 has a problem by using some jargon. Yeah,
it's very, very technical. So
I don't even know what TAPOS is.
I think it's transactions as proof of stake.
All right.
So
okay.
So it's an additional safeguard to delegated proof of stake on the system that somehow embeds, I guess, previous transactions into the block, like a previous transaction into a block as well. Or I don't know the details actually, but it's a more safeguard to having certain attacks on the system. I think replay attacks. So so I wish I could explain the detail, but I don't want to go there right now because
fair enough.
I'll probably give you the wrong kind of.
Besides, that's sort of beside the point of what we're here to talk about, which is the way that this article is worded.
True. So it simplifies it. It's just a simple procedural statement that just asserts that when this is when the contract is valid, right? Okay, so any questions? So let's just go on. If there's any questions on that. So Tanish, thanks for writing that. So he wrote both of those on the chat. So yeah, are there any questions about that? I don't have too many questions. It seems more like a procedural article.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any questions about it. To me, it's necessary to have this article because it makes the Ricardian contract. It gives a term to the legally binding nature of a Ricardian contract.
Okay.
And a little bit of form to, just like if you're using the contract, we can assume that you've accepted its terms.
Oh, thanks for the other detail about Tapos, Tanish. So yeah, so I agree. Ricardian, someone mentioned that Ricardian is not defined. So that's something maybe to think about, where a lot of whether it's statutes or what, they usually have definitions.
Sure.
So someone mentioned, I think in a previous that was an EOS Alliance call, and they mentioned something about defining Ricardians. So anyway, so we'll move on. So Justin has a question here. Does Article 6 put onus on BP to vet the Ricardian contract, since they are the only layer in between it being written and then put on a block? Are contract signers the only liable parties? It was Kevin from EOS New York that was calling into question Ricardian contract validity. Okay, so that's a good question. The big I think difference with version 2 is really the idea that the block producers are ultimately the jury in dispute resolution, and that is, I think, the biggest significance of version 2 compared to version 1, where we had ECAF. So if you read the preface on block 1, they talk about, and I missed this, but they talk about possibly having some other additional. They said they just kind of mentioned that block producers can refer to outside parties for I guess interpretation or arbitration rulings, but ultimately they're the ones that have to enact and enforce it. So it's interesting, even if you have something like ECAF or an arbitration third-party arbitrator that's chosen by both parties, you're still going to come to a situation that the block producers have to make the ultimate decision to accept the ruling or accept the arbiters in the contract. So I think, and I think EOS New York is also helping out with that, where they're trying to have an on-chain process to make sure that whatever arbitration forum is chosen, that it's registered on the blockchain. I think that's the intent of what EOS New York is working on with their kind of on-chain reg what is it, I guess a couple features of what their latest project on governance and arbitration. Just trying to get all the arbitrators to be registered online. I should get a link and put it there too. So they have a Medium article that explains what they're doing with, I think, Reg Forum and Reg Arbiter or something like that. I forget the two features that they're building. So, but does that answer your question, Justin? I don't know, Jason, if you can also kind of chime in here, or anybody else in the chat. Does Article 6 put on a, yeah, Reg Forum and Reg Arbitrator? So, and Tanish, if you can help maybe put the link of EOS New York's Medium article about the purpose of their creating Reg Forum and Reg Arbitrator. So yeah, essentially it's not necessarily Article 6, Justin. It's probably Article 1 and 2 that makes the distinction, or that puts the onus on block producers. Article 6 is just I think independent of that. So it's in both constitutions. Go ahead, Anita, if you can say something. Anita, you have to have, for some reason, you're not connected on audio. You have to kind of accept any pop-up that shows up on your computer, if it is showing up, and then you'll kind of be in this as a participant with audio. So maybe you can write something in the chat, Anita. Sorry, for some reason, I don't know why you're the audio link. It's what we do is we invite you, and there should be a pop-up. Crowdcast uses a particular system, so I invite you, and there should be a pop-up that says, accept, this invitation. So, but if you could just type, sorry, let me try again and just invite you again too, just in case something wasn't working originally.
While you're doing that, June, I'll just throw in my comment on the question from Justin. I think the answer is yes, that Article 6 does put some onus on the block producer to vet the Ricardian contract and ultimately to enforce. But I don't think that is central to what Article 6 does. I think block producers have onus for the state of the blockchain as a result of the entire constitution altogether. Article 6 just is one more contribution.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, that 6 is just part of it. So let's move on. If no one has any objections. So let's go on to the next one. Jason, I'll let you.
Yeah, sure, I'll read it. Just scroll up here. Article 7 says, parties voluntarily consent for all other parties to permanently and irrevocably retain, copy, analyze, and distribute all broadcast transactions and derivative information.
Thanks, Tanish, for putting that as well. Yeah, so and then we have a version 1 that has a slightly different version of that. A slightly different one. So maybe Tanish, if you can also add that'd be great. So essentially, Jason, do you want to comment on this one?
Well, this basically gives permission to for everybody to keep a copy of the full ledger. This enforces the transparency of the EOS blockchain.
Okay. And it's also transparency. It's also the
right to distribute, the right to keep a copy for yourself and share it and make it available.
Okay, so parties. So it's all the definition. So when we say parties, I assume token holders.
I think it's a bit broader than just token holders.
Okay.
I think parties is about as top level a concept as there is. It's any organization, it's any individual.
Okay.
I don't think it necessarily just means token holders.
Okay. Because in the first version it says members, right? and then this one says party. So I assume the only distinction is members are broader token holders, meaning they don't even have to be a party to the contract. So parties probably implies that there's the parties to the contract, like two counterparties, right? So maybe there was a distinction between the two like versions right there, where it says instead of members it's parties.
Yeah, I think members means token holders. If I'm interpreting version 1 correctly, the word members has been used in a couple of articles, generally referring to token holders.
Okay. And what is this like in the first version? It seems as though it says members may only publish information to the blockchain that is within their right to publish. So this to me seems more of a kind of copyright protection clause, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so I think the version 2 removes that, saying that, hey, this is no copyright. It's also that's censorship too, right? Isn't it? Like if you're a blockchain, you have to kind of almost broadcast all the data that's on it, whether it's copyrighted or not, right? That's the nature of blockchains, right? So
part of it, yeah, I think the simplification was made. Well, first of all, only publish information that is within your right to publish. Clearly, that has to do with, copyright and what's it, release waiver, like a photo of somebody else. If I took somebody else's photo and I didn't have their permission to broadcast that, but I published it to a blockchain anyway, that would not. I would be violating their right to privacy in that case.
Wait, can you just repeat what you just said, Jason? I was just reading.
Well, sure. This happens on social media every day. People take a photograph of somebody else and then publish that photograph without their permission. That's actually a violation of their right to privacy. So that's particularly problematic for blockchains that can't remove any content once it's been published. And this is one of those issues where enforcement is really tough. So I think this constitutional article was simplified for that reason. They took out the part about within your right to publish. And
yeah, because
real can of worms, man.
Yeah, because the whole GDPR is the other thing about the right to be forgotten and things like that, where blockchains are really the kind of unable to probably comply with that. It's like the opposite, where everything's about transparency, and with that you can't really you can't remove data, right? So
you nailed it. GDPR. It's a tough cookie to crack when it comes to blockchain.
Yeah, it's just almost the. Anyway, so I don't want to go into a tangent here. So yeah, it does seem like that's is that the reason for it? And then the other part is parties voluntary consent for other parties permanently retaining, copy, analyze, distribute. And I assume that's it. You anyways, I'm trying to figure out what the purpose is mainly for this. Is it really just to uphold that you essentially, I mean, it's just the purpose of blockchain. I'm just uphold that, anything that you put on it has to be duplicated amongst all the nodes in the system anyways. And that, everyone has the right to publish that, and see it, analyze it, retain a copy, analyze, distribute. So yeah, so I guess it's like if you have copyrighted material, like, because all the nodes are going to be running, they're going to have all these transactions that have copyright info, but you have to rebroadcast it for the system to work, right? And make the blockchain, the single source of truth, and so that's, to me, the nature of a blockchain. You have to, as a node, rebroadcast that. But so anyways, it's a little confusing because it doesn't specify.
I like version 2 better, and this article absolutely does need to be part of the Constitution, or something to this effect. It opens up the field for new block producer candidates to use, access, and redistribute the data that is needed. Like that's decentralization in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's kind of inherent in
this as possible.
Yeah, it is. So I would think then, because this is the nature of, I mean, you can't censor, any of these. You're not supposed to. I guess as a block producer, you could, right? Is that? It's also
not okay. One block producer either. This article just makes sure that the state of the blockchain is open and accessible for anybody to get a copy and share it and analyze it and basically work with it. It gives everyone permission to do something like build a block explorer, for example.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess the point too is just to make sure new block producers, and just mentioned that just a good way to hold existing BPs accountable, and then also new ones where, you can't, because technically you have the power as a block producer to censor transactions, right? Is that the worry?
Well, not by yourselves. No single block producer can censor anything. They need to have supermajority.
Yeah, exactly. So
that instruction needs to come from an arbitrator.
Okay, so, but no, I'm thinking technically though, like technologically.
Sure. Well, technologically, they still need a supermajority.
So they need a supermajority. So I guess, okay, so you just want to kind of state. So is this for block producers then? Is this, because I'm trying to figure out like what the purpose of this is and who this is intended for? Because when we look at the Constitution, and we have members, there's so many different, I guess, parties, right? You have members, you have counterparties of contract, you have the block producers. And I think one way to think about the Constitution in general is to think about it as constraining and limiting the power of a particular group, let's say.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So please help define within their right.
Well,
okay, really Anita wants to say something. go ahead, Anita. If you could type it, we'll read it out. And in the meantime, Tanish says, "Please define within their right," which is so. Okay, so this was you're talking about version 1, right, Tanish? Yeah. So essentially, I don't know what the original purpose was, but I think it was, my guess is that someone wanted to prevent copywritten material to be put on the blockchain. They wanted to discourage it, so they had that. So they were, I think, worried that someone was going to go and sue someone on the blockchain or whoever for putting copyright material on the blockchain, and so they wanted to discourage that. Is my guess, and that's kind of anti-blockchain in a way, but anyways, so that would be my thought on why they did that. So within their right is, I mean, that's subjective, right? I mean, is there, copyright laws, there's different principles and theories behind it, and some people don't believe it's necessary, but I mean, it's subjective. So so that would be my answer. Is there anything else about within people's right? And that was taken away from version 2. So I'm sure Dan didn't want that anyways. So
sure, there are lots of examples of pieces of data that a person doesn't have a legal right to share. There's lots of examples of illegal digital content, period.
Oh yeah, that's kind of the norm. And then every country has their own rules on that, different laws.
Yep.
So okay, so Anita, okay, the user should know that by using blockchain, they give their consent to use their images, etc., by any other party. So if there's a social media and someone puts his picture there, it's obvious that it will be used and would be too difficult to check anyone's copyright. So yeah, that's her point, kind of against the right to privacy, I guess. Or, you know, once you put it on the blockchain, you're, and that's kind of true too. I mean, if we're in the public sphere, if we walk on down the street, like someone can take a picture, and I don't think that's illegal, right? If you're in the public space, and redistribute that. I mean, you know, it's just, again, it gets a little, I'm sure people will argue one way or the other. But that's Anita's argument against having the right to your pictures or images on social media. And then Rogby says, instead of putting that in the Constitution, why not leave it to the person who posted a copyright item to the blockchain, the accuser, and the authorities? Yeah, you know, that's the other thing. Are we, you know, before we were talking about block producers and trying to encourage them not to censor, I guess. But if we didn't have this article, you know, what would happen? And so Rogby says, well, why not leave it to anybody who posted on the blockchain and go to outside authorities to resolve the issue. One thing about that too, though, is that, you know, on a blockchain, you can't really remove things from the blockchain necessarily, right? So so it makes it difficult. Once you're on the blockchain, it's really this history that'll always be there. Is it enforceable?
That is one of the things that makes EOS kind of special, is that it has this degree of flexibility. I think that is one of the great strengths of EOS. As you know, it's something that makes EOS stand out. We want sort of the best of both worlds. We want something that is addendum only. So we don't want to see a lot of content getting deleted, because that just, at that point, it's kind of like, well, why are we even bothering with blockchain at all?
Yeah. So it's dangerous.
There might be problems at some point in the future where it's appropriate to remove some content.
Yeah, and then so I think a good solution is just keep it to the dApp layer, because you can't censor on a front end or at the dApp layer. But I think to have everything on the base layer is fine. You know, just if it's something objectionable to people, you can just create a platform that just doesn't display it. So, but have everything else in the blockchain is kind of one way to do it. So you're not censoring anything. So censorship resistance is probably the biggest, one of the biggest benefits of the blockchain. So if any outside authority has any influence over what's put on, or, you know, that's dangerous too. So,
indeed, yeah, it totally undermines our concept of digital sovereignty.
So Anita says,
we want our own rules and follow our own rules.
Yeah. So Anita says, let's not make rules that are not easily enforceable. Justin says there'll be likely tools to keep data identifiable by some kind of tag, but the content itself and who it came from might be to be anonymous via these perceived future tools.
I think we're assigning a lot more. We're assigning a lot more concept to Article 7 than it actually has. Article 7 only says one thing, very simple. In version 2, Article 7 only says anyone can have the blockchain and analyze it and share it. It protects the accessibility of the entire blockchain, so it keeps the blockchain open to new block producer candidates, for one thing, and it lets anybody I guess you could say, interact with and use the data of this blockchain.
Okay. So yeah. So let's cool. So let's move on. And if no one objects, there seemed to be agreement there. Okay, so let's go to the next article. The good thing is that there's overlap with version 1 and version 2. So while we're covering version 2, we're also covering version 1. So do you want to do the next one? We have a couple left. That's it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we're getting there, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, well, number 8 actually reminds me a lot of number 6. It says, use of the blockchain shall constitute consent to its terms. And this is, I guess you could summarize almost every piece of software user agreement as just this one article. Like, if you create a Facebook account, you agree to its terms. If you create an EOS account, you agree to the Constitution by default. You can't play here unless you play by the rules. That's all this is.
Yeah. So and let's see how that is either probably a complement to Article 6, which talks about the recording contract.
Yeah, there's some overlap here. This is a term of acceptance.
It's a little vague to consent to what terms, you know. It's like, I mean, I guess it's the Constitution. It should maybe explicitly say it should constitute consent to this Constitution, right?
Yeah, it should refer to itself. And I agree with Justin that this one might be appropriate as the first article.
Yeah. It's kind of broad too. It's like I don't know legally what people will say. It's like, oh, you usually have these big user agreements. You have to click on it. People will determine how. I guess the just using something. It's hard to be contractually obligated just by using something. So I think it's a way to try to maybe just have this Constitution be validated just without having to do the typical kind of acceptance and clicking of yes, that I think normally courts require, I guess.
The sticky wicket
for acceptance of
this concept is called informed consent. So how can we possibly be sure that a person who's now using an EOS token has informed themselves and granted an informed consent to the terms?
Exactly. That's a good point. Informed consent is a good word.
We can't force anybody to read this stuff, but this article does need to be part of the Constitution because it makes the rest of the Constitution enforceable.
Okay. So yeah, I think it's pretty broad, right? And so I think it's fine to state that, right? So Anita also put another one: for all service providers who provide tools to facilitate the construction and signing of transactions on behalf of others shall present the full recording contract terms of this Constitution and other referenced. I assume there will be a pop-up message. So yeah, so that we discussed last week, and yeah, we assume that anybody who's dealing with signing transactions or creating transactions will have to have under Article 4 these pop-ups. So yeah, they do have the additional requirement in Article 4 for pop-ups. So I just think that Article 8 is just, it may be a backup to say, hey, like, just by using it, you're also obligated. I don't know how strong that is when you consider people like informed consent, but
Well, the point of this constitution is not that courts will recognize it as much as that block producers will recognize it. So I don't have a problem with the fact that it's simple.
Okay. Well, that's true too. I mean, we're not talking. I was just thinking like just traditional legal.
Yeah.
Rogby says, what about people who don't read the Constitution, like Facebook terms of services, and there's and that's what it's supposed to cover. Rogby and in the traditional world, there's always some contention about terms of services not being obvious versus and as Jason mentioned, informed consent. So there's some gray area there where if people don't read it, they might have, and it's not obvious, there might be a case in the traditional world, but in our world, I guess ultimately the block producers are the deciders of that. And so let's go to the last article, since there's a lot of these articles are complement each other, and that was just one sentence. So the last one is
just to answer the questions that are popping up in the chat.
Okay.
What about people who don't read the Constitution, like Facebook terms of services? There's nothing that anybody can do about that. We can't force a person to read. We make it available. Anybody can read it. Anybody can access it. And if they choose not to, well, we can't force them to. So there is no solution there.
Okay.
Sorry. Number 8, read your shit or else.
I'm afraid to click on that YouTube link.
Me too. Okay, the last one then?
Yeah, so it was the last one.
It says, this constitution may be amended by a vote of the EOS token holders that attracts no less than 15% of 15% staked vote participation among tokens and no fewer than 10% more yes votes than no votes, sustained for 30 continuous days within a 120-day period.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm fine with this amendment article. The only thing is it's pretty arbitrary. I think it's just a practical number, 10%. 15%, staked. Typically, to decide quorums in larger organizations, it's just 50%, right? So, but I think it's so difficult to get 50% that I think it's okay to have a lower bar. But yeah. Anyway, so
yeah, I'm comfortable with 15% as a minimum, because the tokens have multiple functions, right? Like I imagine that when a person has used their tokens, staked them to participate in a referendum, that those tokens won't be spent for the 30 days, and people want to use their tokens to spend or transact. So 15% that are essentially locked up and not being spent, that's like it would be unreasonable, I think, to lock up more than that, or expect that token holders would be willing to lock up more than that.
Yeah, there is that part of it too, the spending, and I guess but 15 is like in typical organizations, that's pretty low, just in general when we think about it. I think it's and I wish it would be actually higher, but it's pretty arbitrary too. I mean, the only thing you could, this is delegated proof of stake, so essentially 51% is really the majority that rules, like 51% ownership, right? So I mean, I think it's important to identify quorum, and the hard thing is it's arbitrary. I think if it was a smaller group and there was more participation, 51% would be probably the guideline, and then beyond that, it's whoever can show up. I think you can determine the quorum, but who's reasonably expected, or what percent is reasonably expected to show up is another way to determine, what what could qualify as a quorum. Okay, so anyway, so I don't know. I think it is important to decide. It's just a little arbitrary. So, but for now, I don't think there's enough people who think that's too low. I mean, I mean, people aren't protesting right now, so I think it's okay.
I think it's okay too, and that's It took a while to get 15% of tokens to even agree on a main chain, on a mainnet, to launch this whole thing back in June.
Yeah, it says if it's only 15%, then if the majority don't agree, it would be hard for them to override the Constitution. Yeah, it wouldn't be hard. Yeah, so if they, they really wanted to, they could come in and change the vote if we had people. So I guess it's okay. And sometimes I feel like the less the base, this may be a direct regression, but if the lower the bar is for the quorum, you almost want a higher threshold for a yes vote. Like, so instead of just a simple majority of 51%, I would say if your threshold's too low, I think maybe you should get a super majority of like 60%, to approve of a action. That's one way to make it, I think, closer to being safer with decision making, I guess. Anyway, so I just throwing that out there.
Just running a little bit of quick math in my head. What this really means is that 8.5% of the tokens can effectively change the Constitution. Because to get 15% with a margin of 10% greater yes, 8.5% that vote yes and 6.5% that vote no would be as close and as small as this possibly could get.
Oh, okay. So it does do that because it does need the 10% vote there.
You need 10% greater yes.
Okay, no. So it kind of does what I was thinking, that you need a higher super majority by having that threshold of 10%. Okay, at the minimum. So yeah, so okay, that might be sufficient. So so I think we covered it. Should we cover just, we covered version 2. I think we're also covering version 1 of there's corresponding clauses in version 1. Should we go back and see if there's any changes? I guess, is there any, like the last one, amending, is there, that's the same. It's when I'm reading it, it seems like it's the same, right? Article 7, we outlined the differences. Articles 5, 6, we outlined the differences. So that's fine. I think we covered it. So back to, let's say, just the overall philosophy of version. Maybe we could just get into the discussion. We covered the entirety of version 2 of the Constitution. It seems as though the main 2 articles, that was the big difference. The rest of the articles, there were maybe some tweaks here and there. And so let's just maybe go back to the big discussion, which is Article 1 and 2 of version 2, because the rest of it seems like there's not as much contention about, right?
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that.
And then Tanisha, if you can also chime in too, because the bond discussion was interesting. So yeah, so let's go back to Article 1, 1 and 2. Like 1 and 2 of the Constitution, version 2. And let's just go over that again and just have a discussion overall, because I think that's where the biggest discussion is about the Constitution. So maybe let's go for Jason. Do you want to read 1 again?
Okay. If there is a dispute on intent of code, then intent shall be determined by a supermajority vote of elected producers or an arbiter mutually agreed to by the parties to the dispute and enacted by producers. A supermajority may, at their discretion, freeze a contract during an active dispute until such time as code to fix the contract is available. The parties to the dispute must produce proposed or replacement code.
Hey, Jason, do you want to maybe this is a long one, so
yeah,
should we take it maybe sentence by sentence?
Yeah.
So the first sentence, the intent shall be determined by a supermajority vote of elected producers or an arbiter mutually agreed to by the parties to the dispute and enacted by producers. I remember Kevin from EOS New York said that's a little bit vague, but aside from that, if maybe we could clarify language. So the supermajority of elected block producers is this jury, right, to determine what what the intent is of the code. Or an arbiter. So if you are in a contract, it seems that the second part of it is or an arbiter mutually agreed to by parties. So let's say a DApp layer where you have a company and a user that chooses an arbiter, a third-party arbiter. Let's say ECAF, or let's just say maybe a separate outside arbiter. So they'll decide in that case. Let's say the arbiter situation. So a DApp layer chooses a third party to arbitrate, and then they have a ruling. So and then it says, so if you do that, then or an arbiter mutually agreed to by the parties to the dispute and enacted by producers. So block producers still have to uphold the arbiter's ruling, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're supposed to.
So, and that gets tricky, and I think the reg forum reg arbitrator kind of on-chain system can help with that to make sure that these arbiters are legitimate, are recognized.
Yeah.
But assume that that's the case. I mean, that's important. But the block producers still will have to defer to this third party, which I guess that's not as bad. But if they don't have a mutually agreed arbiter, let's say, they just have to make their own decision outside of any third party. They just have to make the decision themselves. I think that's the big issue.
That's the big problem that I have with this article.
Yeah.
Is that this article specifies block producers as being primary to the arbitration process. It even lists block producers before it lists an arbitrator, and I don't think that's appropriate. I think it's too heavy a burden to put on block producers.
Yeah, and just to note, Kevin from EOS New York says that's not what. That's not what block producers would want, in his opinion, and
it is. It's just
it's not their expertise. Is also
exactly. It's not what they signed up for. And last week when we were dissecting this this article, we brought up the concept of separation of powers and how important it is to keep a system of checks and balances where we can't concentrate power in just one sphere. And the problem I have with this article is that it concentrates too much decision-making power right in the hands of a block producer. For one thing, it's not what they signed up for. It's expensive to do this. It's outside their core competency. And so, yeah, I would take out that one sentence that specifies block producers as an appropriate interpreter for the intention of code. That's an arbitration function, plainly.
Yeah. So this is the other, I think, reason why, if we kind of skip to Article 2, block producers shall not freeze or modify contracts that are operating as intended.
Yeah.
I think and I mentioned this kind of in the EOS Alliance meeting, is that I think the intention was that they didn't want to slow down the blockchain. So they wanted to specify explicitly that block producers shouldn't freeze or modify contracts unless there's extenuating circumstances or some and it's mutually agreed in some contract. So and there's an arbiter ruling. So anyway, so I think the intent was just like ECAF and this whole situation with version 1 and what happened with all these cases and freezes on the blockchain that was causing a lot of harm to the system. So I think so the default is almost, just try not to do much at all. Like, don't freeze anything or modify anything unless you have a super majority of block producers, not just a few. You have to get a super majority to all agree, so that it will limit the scope of just arbitration in general.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that interpretation of Article 2. Article 1 assigns powers. Article 2 restricts powers. That's the way I see it. And so between the two of them, they strike a balance.
Yeah. And I think the big thing is, do we need, it goes back to do we have an arbitration layer that is at least makes decisions, number one, to offload the responsibilities, not responsibilities, let's say the work that's necessary to interpret intent of code. But ultimately, I think the reason why version 2 went this way is because even if you had something like ECAF as a check and balance, ultimately it's the block producers that will enact any change on the blockchain. So it's almost like you add this layer that says, that's going to rule, but the block producers are still ultimately the authority, right? So that's the other thing. And I think maybe they were just trying to shift the burden, shift the burden to the BPs, because it was naturally in their power to actually enforce things. But
yeah, you can think of it like a court and a bailiff. Like, the block producer would be like the bailiff who would physically enforce. But the real authority in the court is the judge. The problem I have with Article 1 is that it assigns the role of judge to an entity that is actually the bailiff. It's not appropriate. The bailiff should not be the judge.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. I still think that if we have any kind of judiciary, whether it's a judge or jury or arbitrator or arbiter, it'll always come down to enforcement. So you can say that the block producers have to abide by a certain arbitration.
Technically speaking, they don't have to, and they know it. But this is an election. Block producers are voted in, and their reputation is what builds their business. So when an arbiter makes a decision, block producers will receive the decision and decide for themselves whether or not to enforce. In a straightforward case, I think that there would be no reason to expect a block producer to ignore the ruling of the arbiter.
Yeah, there is that voting mechanism, but I'm also just thinking about efficiency as well. I mean, do we need the maybe before I talk too much, let's Tanisha's writing a lot, so maybe I should also read that too. So we should have a governance conference discussing automated dispute resolution to help its scaling. So that's a comment. If there's a dispute on intent of code, the intent shall be determined by. Okay, so he's writing the clause. Alice develops the application X and mentions the arbitration forum ETAF in the recording contract. In case of any dispute with the application X intent of code, Alice would reach out to block producers. Block producers make their own judgment or consider opinion of arbitrator to enforce. Limited to intent of code, not subjective disputes. So, yeah. So I think Tanish, that was your example that you created, right? It's not written anywhere in the Constitution, I think. But essentially, yeah. So it still puts the burden on the BPs of making the judgment, and so people have to go like, and then Kevin mentioned this too, like each dispute, they would have to reach out to all the BPs, all 15 BPs, and not only 15, they probably have to reach out to up to 21 BPs that are likely to be in the top 21 and plead their case. So it's operationally, that's it could be automated, sure, but yeah. So maybe, we'll see if it's automated. It might not be as bad. Maybe the idea is just to discourage disputes, handling disputes anyways, just because you need a supermajority. It is complex, and people will probably end up getting frustrated and not care to arbitrate.
Can you imagine if you were a block producer and now you're fielding requests from a world full of token holders?
Yeah, exactly. You'll be bombarded.
Big workload, man.
It'd be incredibly efficient. But see, I don't like, so that's true. But I don't think, I think arbitration is the same. Like if you have an arbitration layer, you add an extra layer without any enforcement power, and they can offload, maybe handle some of the workload or a large part of the workload. But then it's the idea, okay, well, do you really trust their decisions ultimately? Because, as block producers, you're the one enforcing it. So you have to have some level of trust there. And there's still a responsibility there. I think that's just natural because you're the one enacting it. So all the arbitrators' rulings are really they're just rulings. They're non-binding, or they could be binding, but there's no enforcement power behind that, right? So,
right, that's the way we want it. I think that is the most sensible system.
Yeah, I would argue though it's just as inefficient though. I mean, it's a better system maybe to have a third party arbitrate, sure, but at the base layer especially, I would say, okay, well, can we just leave that to the DApp layer where we have the same thing? We have arbitrator rulings. We could say that if these are recognized and these are on-chain arbitrators that are recognized by EOS, then we could have a clause that says block producers will comply with their orders. And ultimately, maybe not make it that strong where ultimately block producers will. So maybe it's not as so this maybe not as bad if okay. So if we do have these third party arbitrators, and there's rulings, whether base layer or not, just forget that. So there's rulings. Block producers ultimately decide, so they can use those third party rulings to just offload their work, right? And ultimately they'll still technically be responsible, but at least they'll still be referring to rulings by the arbitrator. So,
yep. Yeah, I'll be right back.
Okay.
I think we're kind of clear on this one, and we talked about it last week as well.
Okay.
I don't know.
So any other so that's the big thing, I guess. This is really the big difference. Articles 1 and 2. So anyways, we can anyone on the kind of several that are out there, any additional thoughts about version 2 versus version 1? So it gets back to the original conversation, I think. Do we want base layer arbitration, something like ECAF? Do we want version 2 where the block producers are responsible? It could be inefficient. I think it'll be inefficient either way. What are people's thoughts? We can still have arbitration with version 2, at least I would say at the DApp layer. Any comments? Anyone there? Just talking to myself. So Justin says, I like DApp layer arbitration that DApp developer chooses. The user agrees to the arbitrator if they agree to terms of service. Okay. I'm okay with, but this is what Justin says, but for base layer, I'm okay with ECAF as long as they have some checks and balances. Only goes to base layer of DApp. Doesn't specify their arbitrator. Okay. So DApp layers choosing which arbitrators, their arbitrators is important to you, Justin, it seems, and kind of at the base layer, as long as they don't choose who you have to arbitrate with. And yeah, these are all contracts. So if you and a counterparty choose an arbitrator, it's under contract law. And so that should be fine. If there are, I think the other thing is if people, and this is gonna happen. I mean, people might not have recording contracts. People, people might not specify an arbitration forum or an arbiter. So that can happen. So that might be what people will argue in favor of a default arbitration. Anything else? So anybody else want to go on a video chat? Okay, no. But ECAF has to have CMB. What does CMB stand for? Checks and balances. Okay. Yeah, ultimately though, the arbitration, like ECAF doesn't really have enforcement powers, so even however they rule, they don't really have that much power. They just have influence, so that if the block producers don't abide by ECAF's ruling, block producers could be voted out, but block producers can argue maybe that ECAF ruling is no good. The burden is on BPs to judge. So it's more of a the let's say an ECAF ruling would be what's the term? I don't know what the best word is, but It won't be, they won't have power to enforce anything. It all ends up being under the BP's power to enact. So, but I do think ECAF should have some kind of there should be a referendum to vote them in, I think, whether it's ECAF or just the specific arbitrators. But I'm still thinking, I don't even know if it's necessary, right? Because you create this entire bureaucracy, and if they don't have that much power, it's like, sure, they could be a check and balance, but if we just have that all on the third layer, on the DAP layer, maybe it's fine, and we don't have to create the additional complexities. So Justin says this is a gray argument. BPs don't want onus, should want them to have it. Some want them to have it all, should be grayer. Unless consensus puts onus on one group, which I say is a centralization by nature. So that's lame. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, people could argue, on both sides. Tanish says we could go against the award if it affects some whale or exchange. Will you trust us then? Just saying. Maybe, can you clarify that? We could go against the award if it affects some whale or exchange. You're talking about ECAF or something, or BPs? I guess BPs can say if they're affected by whales and there's some award against a whale, and they convince BPs that's some, I guess there's some danger there. A ruling by ECAF non-binding. So yeah, I mean, either way, I mean, BPs have the power, so people will be upset if the BPs go against maybe a third party ruling. The whales kind of control everything, so I mean, they can manipulate the BPs, they can manipulate ECAF. But I mean, that's the nature of delegated proof of stake. I don't think you could do much about that. And I think it'll work out because essentially you're betting on the token value. You're betting that people are incentivized by token value, and ultimately, I think that's the ultimate incentive mechanism. So. According to a lot of BPs, if ECAF rules, they will produce blocks, no questions asked. In fact, they are producing blocks for illegal things right now, quote unquote. EOS Bets doesn't have open source code, which is the law of the current constitution. Yet EOS Bets transactions are showing up in produced blocks. Again, a lot of BPs don't care and just produce. That's the reality. I mean, it's the nature of the technology to just operate as and adding these additional layers is kind of cutting against the grain of the natural operations of the blockchain. We say, okay, you should just, I mean, blockchain, I mean, people argue that block producers should just produce blocks. That should be the main purpose. That could be a good, I think that's a valid argument, where all this external stuff about judging, and especially in subjective matters, might not be the best way to approach it. It's hard to enforce things on the blockchain. It slows it down, I think. BP role needs to be defined in the beginning before rules are laid out, maybe. I agree with that. this is some. I don't want to digress, but there's also the idea that then why do we even have a constitution? I would say ask the same question. I mean, what is the purpose of the Constitution, right? What are we trying to achieve? And if it's not, things aren't enforceable, why have it in the Constitution? So every clause or every article that we have in the Constitution, we should ask that question. I would also ask if each article, is this absolutely necessary for the functioning of the blockchain? If it's not absolutely necessary, I would argue that it's better left out. So what will remain in a constitution that's absolutely necessary? I don't know. There might not be much. You might just let it operate. And ultimately, it's delegated proof of stake. I mean, if you want your token value to increase, you should be incentivized not to do bad things. So the other thing that before, it's a little bit of digression, but I think one part of the Constitution that is not discussed right now is upgrades to the software. I think that should be discussed because block producers can upgrade software and make significant changes to the entire blockchain. And when we talk about limits to powers and constitutions limiting the power of government, that's what the U.S. Constitution was about. You want to limit the power of certain actors in the system, and so block producers have the most power. So if you want to limit their executive power, the idea that they can upgrade a system to whatever they want by majority rule or whatever, maybe there should be a check against that as well. I mean, they could upgrade any part of their software, any part of the software without a referenda. So when do we choose a referenda and when do we allow the BPs to make upgrades? And maybe we should clarify that, because if we have bugs in the system, sure, we don't need a referenda on that. Just let the block producers upgrade the software. If it's a significant change to the blockchain, I mean, that's what governance was supposed to be about. Parameters, changing parameters on a blockchain. Bitcoin and the block size debate, that's really the original I guess purpose of the blockchain. It wasn't really a full-on legal system that we were creating, which I don't mind maybe in the future to have, but the primary purpose of blockchains before us was, how do you make decisions on upgrades to the software, block size debates, things like that. So things like a Rex, right? Do you want Rex or not? I mean, it seems like most people are in favor, but that should probably be a referenda, right? Any comments on that? Or maybe it's a little bit of a digression. So Tanish says, I think we could define the Constitution better with time, maybe after IBC and as blockchain gets mature. That would be great. So any other ideas or thoughts that you want to discuss? We're actually, I think, through most of what we wanted to cover today in terms of the articles. It's a lot to think about. I do recommend reading the Block 1, a link that we have, and also Bytemaster's blog on version 2 of the Constitution. So Justin says, definitely interesting. How much code can you launch from core? How much code can you launch from core code and still be the same thing? seems like version 2 from Dan is written from a more programmatic sentiment, but still talks more about traditional government based for the governments, not tech as he suggests. No other opinion. Okay, so yeah, essentially, yeah, the upgrading code and the software are, I think, important parts to the Constitution, and yeah, V2 doesn't seem to address that. It might touch upon it a little bit, or I guess the 2/3 majority can decide, right? But I think it is mentioned in the Block 1 article about the block producers should be focused on system level contracts. I don't know the context of that. I just remember reading something like that in the Block 1 webpage. So I think we're pretty good in terms of all right, Justin, yeah, thanks for hanging in here and contributing. So anybody else, any last questions? We could wrap up a little bit early today if no one has any other thoughts or ideas. Maybe if you guys have any urgent desires to discuss a particular topic in the Constitution, version 1 or 2, just let me know.
Yeah, Article 3.
Article 3 for which one?
For version 2.
Version 2. Okay. Okay, so let's just hit that today. We could probably go over that today since we still got a half hour left.
Okay.
So, and we covered this last week, right?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so go ahead.
Well, I have a problem with Article 3.
Okay.
And what it does. I think that Article 3 incentivizes laziness on the part of developers. That if they know they can't be held liable for any bugs in their code, unintentional bugs, then what incentive do they have to be very diligent about their own code audit process?
Yeah, there's a moral hazard there. It's unclear too. I mean, it's contract developers. It used to just say developers, so I think there's some definitions we need about developers or contract developers. Just unclear where responsibilities are. If you're a developer for a company, let's say, I mean, I assume has to be liability there because you have a recording contract, right? So code has bugs. That's why we have EOS, is what Tanish says. Solved by involving third-party auditors. So yeah, the responsibility, there's a moral hazard there, I guess. On the flip side, though, Jason, I think developers, especially in the open source side of things, it's good to encourage contributions, right? So that's the flip side, I think, where you don't want them to be discouraged from contributing.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, we don't want to discourage development. So this can be a bit of a sticky wicket to get the best of both.
Yeah, and yeah. So there's that has a lot of there's a lot to discuss there, and it's just also unclear, I think, with the wording. And we should maybe, like with all these articles, one good exercise to have is just make sure we have the intent right with all these articles. And we've discussed it as a group, but we're still a small group. It'd be nice to have the people who wrote it actually write all the intent, like whoever, I would say, I guess, Thomas and all the other people that created version 1, just like alongside the intent, not intent, alongside each article, we should have a separate paragraph that just describes the intentions of each, like what problem are we solving, like with each of these articles, and just so that it'll clarify for us that we're understanding it correctly, right?
That's a great idea, Jude. I think we could even help make that real just by using notes in the Google Drive document that you created. We'll write out interpretation for like what each article is intended to do, and we'll just get them to proofread that and see what they think of our interpretation.
Yeah, so maybe we should crowdsource that. I'll try to. So maybe we could put that link out there again. Just say we'll put it in the governance channel as well. Just say we can. We'll use this Google Doc as a working document to outline the intent of all these articles, or the purpose.
I mean, and taking that angle, the intention of Article 3, I would imagine the intention is to encourage developers and protect developers.
Yeah, I think so too.
It goes a little too far with it, though.
Yeah. So yeah, that's good. It's to get the confirmation of that if that's the case. Yeah, that's what I think as well. And then the second sentence is also to recognize or at least explain where the responsibility lies. It is almost encouraging people to audit on either side, like whether you're not a developer, but if you're on either side, if you're a DApp developer or if you're a user, you're responsible to audit the code, which you have to put the burden on the developer because users don't have the resources typically.
Absolutely correct. And you could compare this to any other complicated product, like a car. If there was a rule saying that the person who's buying the car
exactly has to be like a mechanic.
Yeah, and the mechanic is not liable for any accidents.
Yeah.
That's dangerous, man.
Yeah. So Tanish says, I think it would be better if we stop comparing and start looking for a solution to scale them. We don't have solution to enforce a clause. We shouldn't have that in the Constitution. Yeah, I mean, we could start with a brand new kind of Constitution, maybe that. But I mean, my feeling is that right now, just without anything, I think version 2 is what it seems to be what people would just support by default right now, right? It has parts of what was written in version 1, takes out a lot, and then just kind of has these first 2 clauses or 2 articles that are very significant. But I think right now people just by default will support that. But that's just a comment. But other than that, we could. I think we should really study both as much as we can and have these. And then Tanish, maybe we'll have another one where we think about this, scaling concerns, because I think that is a big issue. Because either version 1 and version 2, I don't think either are scalable right now. So. So V2 is practical. You think it's not ideal, but so maybe. So anyway, so I think we can start with adding to this document just so that we're clear on our understanding of it, and have Thomas and others review it to make sure. There's also good resources with the EOS Alliance. They have Medium articles where they cover each of these, so we can add their comments as well to this. So I'll have to pull the EOS Alliance Medium blogs, but that's another reference.
Mm-hmm.
And then scalability. I think that's a big one. I mean, if we're going to have any arbitration, I just think it just needs to be scalable. I'd just this huge bureaucracy with ECAF. There's a huge potential bureaucracy, and then block producers, if there's going to be, they're going to be a big bureaucracy if they had to handle all these cases as well. So yeah, we should really think about that. What is the actual process, right? So where are people going to submit it, and how much volume is there going to be, and how do we minimize the work that's necessary? Because BPs ultimately have to enforce this. So whether they're taking a ruling from ECAF, they still have to, they have to enact things, right? And there's going to be a lot of potential volume there. And so even if they have to do it themselves, they have to also they'll be bombarded with a lot of cases. So anyway, so that's all. Anything else, Jason?
No, I think we've actually sort of come up with a pretty good plan.
Okay.
I look forward to it.
Great. So the Google Doc, hopefully people can contribute to that. I'll try to review some of the videos that we've had in the past and just kind of just add our views on that Google Doc. And then, yeah, we'll go from there.
Right.
So, yeah, within 3 days, block producers have to analyze and reach consensus. So, yeah, that's practically speaking, that's a huge challenge. And blockchains move so fast, right? And some of them, they probably don't even have 3 days, right?
That's a good expectation.
Yeah, I mean, transactions happen every second, so yeah. Okay. All right, guys. So I'll let you guys go, and really appreciate you guys contributing here, and we'll keep hacking away at this. So, any other final comments, Jason?
Nope. Thanks for hosting. That's all for now.
Okay, cool. All right, guys. See you guys next time. Take care. Cheers.